when your body moves before you agree. Discipline collapses the moment it asks for permission. Most people treat it like a mood. They wait for the right feeling. They negotiate with the morning. The alarm sounds, fingers fumble for silence, cold air touches the lungs, and a deal is struck in the dark. Just today. Just this once. The body stays still. The ceiling watches. The habit weakens without drama. This is not failure. It is a pattern. A man ties his belt in the same place every morning. The fabric pulls tight against his waist. Shoulders stiff from yesterday's work settle into position. He does not feel ready. The room is quiet. Outside, others sleep. He steps forward anyway, because the step is older than his opinion. There is no conversation with himself. Only movement. Most people exhaust themselves trying to become disciplined. They stack rules. They seek motivation. They talk about willpower as if it were a resource to be summoned. But ancient warriors understood something colder. If discipline requires thought, it will eventually be debated. If it requires feeling, it will eventually be postponed. In old training halls, the floor is cold. Knees meet it without ceremony. Breath steadies after resistance, not before. The body learns the hour. The hands reach for the same tools. Over time, not training feels wrong. That inversion is the point. When discipline becomes automatic, it stops asking who you are today. It assumes you already know. If this unsettles you, stay with it. If it threatens your self-image, don't look away. Before continuing, leave one sentence in the comments, the habit you keep negotiating with. No explanation, the quiet collapse happens during negotiation. It always begins the same way. The body is awake before the mind admits it. Eyes open. Dry mouth. A dull ache in the legs from yesterday. The room is still dark enough to hide indecision. Somewhere nearby, a phone waits. This is the moment people believe discipline is tested. It isn't. This is where it dissolves. The negotiation starts softly. No shouting. No drama. Just a suggestion. Not today. Later is fine. You trained yesterday. You deserve rest. The shoulders loosen back into the mattress. Warmth returns. The decision feels reasonable. The body stays still, but something else tightens. In training halls, this moment was never allowed to exist. The bell rings. Knees fold onto the mat before the mind forms a sentence. The floor is cold. The breath catches. There is discomfort, but no debate. Around you, others move the same way. Anyone who hesitates is visible. Social friction replaces internal discussion. Modern life removed that pressure. Now the battle happens alone, inside the skull. Every morning becomes a courtroom. Evidence is presented. Excuses are polished. The verdict is delayed. Even when you win and train later, the damage is done. You taught the body that discipline is optional, conditional, open to appeal. Watch someone who has crossed the line into automatic discipline. Their movements look almost dull. Shoes are put on the same way. Hands wrap the handle without checking mood. Breath finds its count after motion begins, not before. If they miss a day, it irritates them physically. Something feels out of place, like leaving the house without a wallet. People around them notice. Friends joke about rigidity. Invitations are phrased carefully. If you're free, they say, already knowing the answer. Predictability makes others uneasy. It exposes how much of their own life is negotiated minute by minute. This is the hidden cost of choice. Choice feels like freedom, but it drains force. Each decision taxes the nervous system. Each exception weakens the pattern. Discipline that relies on constant choosing will eventually choose comfort. Automatic discipline removes the battlefield entirely. There is no victory, no failure. Only continuation. The body moves. The mind follows, late and resentful. Over time, resentment fades. What remains is a quiet accusation toward anyone still bargaining. And once you see that accusation reflected back at you, you can't unsee it. Choice is the leak that drains force. There is a moment before action where most strength escapes. A man stands in the kitchen, barefoot on cold tile. Morning light cuts across the floor. Coffee steams. His shoulders sag as he scrolls a screen. Training clothes hang nearby, untouched. He hasn't decided yet. That undecided state feels harmless. It isn't. The body waits. Muscles cool. The window closes quietly. In older systems, that gap was sealed. The hour arrived, and movement followed. No evaluation. No mood check. The sword was lifted the same way every time. Hands wrapped the handle before comfort could object. The body learned the sequence long before the mind learned the reason. That order mattered. Watch what happens when choice is removed. Shoes are placed by the door the night before. Laces already loosened. In the morning, fingers pull them tight while the eyes are still heavy. Breath is shallow. Legs feel dull. The body moves anyway. By the time awareness catches up, the threshold is crossed. The room behind you no longer matters. People say they want freedom. What they mean is variety. But variety requires decisions, and decisions invite negotiation. Negotiation invites delay. Delay invites decay. The chain breaks without noise. Later, they blame discipline. They never blame choice. In a training hall, the social cost is immediate. Everyone else kneels. The floor is cold against the knees. If you hesitate, you are alone in standing. Heat rises behind the eyes. The group doesn't scold you. They don't need to. Your hesitation announces itself. Shame does the work. Tomorrow, your body remembers. Modern life removed that mirror. Now the only witness is your reflection, half-lit, easily ignored. You tell yourself you'll adjust the plan. You'll be flexible. Flexibility feels intelligent. Over time, it makes you soft in places you don't notice until pressure arrives. Automatic discipline is not rigid. It is precise. When rain falls, training moves indoors without discussion. When exhaustion appears, intensity drops, not consistency. When schedule breaks, the next available slot is taken immediately. These responses are decided once, then obeyed forever. The mind is spared. Those who live this way are accused of being narrow. Friends tease them for being predictable. Invitations come with disclaimers. You probably won't, they say, smiling. The smile is uneasy. Predictability exposes how much of life is still improvised. Once choice is removed, something unsettling happens. The body stops asking. The calendar becomes irrelevant. The action occurs whether you feel aligned or not. And when you watch others stall inside endless options, you feel a quiet distance grow. That distance isn't pride. It's recognition. And it asks a question you can't keep avoiding. Continuity survives where perfection quietly dies. Perfection is loud. It announces itself with plans. A man misses a morning session and feels the break immediately. Shoulders tighten. Jaw sets. The thought arrives fast, today is ruined. He sits longer than intended. Coffee cools untouched. The chain snaps, not because he stopped once, but because stopping now feels justified. The body learns that absence erases obligation. In older practice, the response was smaller. A monk with a fever still sits. Briefly. The mat is cold. Breath is shallow. He does not chase form. He maintains the line. When he rises, sweat dampens the cloth at his back. Others see him leave early. No praise follows. Continuity is assumed, not rewarded. This is where most modern discipline fails. It demands a perfect performance or nothing at all. Miss one day, and the ritual collapses under the weight of expectation. The nervous system reads inconsistency as permission. Tomorrow becomes optional. Optional becomes unlikely. Watch someone who understands continuity. Injury slows them. They practice footwork instead of strikes. The movement is smaller, less impressive. Knees ache. Fingers are stiff. They finish sooner than usual. The session barely registers as training, but the body recognizes it. The hour is kept. The place is honored. The chain holds. There is social friction here too. People question it. Why bother if you can't do it properly? They ask. The question sounds logical. It isn't. It confuses intensity with existence. Those who live by continuity don't argue. They continue. Silence does more damage than explanation. At home, the ritual looks almost insulting in its simplicity. Shoes are put on for a 10-minute walk instead of an hour run. The air is cold. The legs complain. Neighbors watch from windows, puzzled. The body returns warmed just enough to remember itself. Tomorrow is protected. Perfection demands mood alignment. Continuity ignores mood entirely. One asks how you feel. The other asks only whether you showed up. Over time, the body stops distinguishing good days from bad ones. There is only the day, and the action attached to it. This is when discipline begins to feel automatic. Not because it is impressive, but because breaking the chain feels physically wrong. Like missing a step on familiar stairs. You recover, embarrassed, already adjusting. People who live this way unsettle others. They don't celebrate streaks. They don't dramatize setbacks. They simply return. Again and again. That calm repetition exposes how fragile most commitments are when they depend on ideal conditions. Once continuity becomes non-negotiable, perfection loses its grip. And when perfection can no longer threaten you, something else steps forward, waiting to be defined. Pre-decided responses and silent sabotage. Most failures don't come from weakness. They come from surprise. A schedule breaks. Rain hits the pavement. A meeting runs long. The body stiffens. The plan evaporates. In that pause, thinking begins. Thinking feels responsible. It isn't. It's the opening where discipline leaks out. A man stands under a gray sky, training bag in hand. Water beads on his jacket. Shoes already damp. He hesitates, just long enough to feel the cold creep into his calves. He considers alternatives. Home is warm. The floor there is dry. The thought feels intelligent. He turns. The body remembers this turn. In older systems, this moment was already solved. When rain fell, training moved indoors. When injury appeared, form changed. When time shrank, duration shrank with it. No one decided in the moment. The response existed before the obstacle. The body executed it without consulting mood. This is what most people misunderstand. Automatic discipline is not stubbornness. It is preparation. The decision is made once, when calm, and obeyed forever, especially when calm disappears. Watch how sabotage works when responses are not fixed. Fatigue shows up, and intensity collapses to zero instead of adjusting. Travel disrupts routine, and routine vanishes entirely. A single missed day turns into a week because the next step requires a fresh decision. Each decision drains force. Soon there is none left to drain. Those who live differently look almost mechanical. When exhaustion appears, they slow down without stopping. The movement is smaller. Breath is shallow. The pulse steadies late. They leave before satisfaction arrives. Consistency is preserved at the cost of pride. People around them misread this. They think discipline means pushing through everything. They admire intensity. They mock restraint. Why not rest properly? They ask. The question carries concern. It also carries ignorance. Rest is already planned. It doesn't need to be invented on the spot. At home, the system is invisible but ruthless. Shoes are laid out the same way. The mat is rolled tight and placed by the wall. When the hour arrives, the body moves before resistance forms. When disruption hits, the next available slot is taken immediately, even if it's imperfect. Especially if it's imperfect. This precision creates distance. Friends feel it. Schedules clash. You become predictable, and predictability unsettles people who survive on improvisation. They sense a wall where there used to be flexibility. But behind that wall, there is quiet. No arguing. No bargaining. No internal collapse disguised as reason. Just action following an old order. Once responses are pre-decided, obstacles lose their power to negotiate. And when obstacles can no longer negotiate, something else begins to shift, deeper than habit, closer to identity, when the body learns before the mind. There comes a point when effort disappears without announcement. The alarm sounds. Eyes open. Heavy eyelids. The room is cold. Before a thought forms, feet touch the floor. The body moves with a dull certainty. There is no surge of resolve. No inner speech. Just motion, already in progress. By the time the mind catches up, the belt is tied. This is not discipline improving. It is discipline relocating. At first, the body resists. Muscles feel thick. The breath is shallow. Shoulders tighten when the routine begins. Early on, every movement feels borrowed, imposed. You are dragging yourself through something foreign. Others see the strain. They comment. "You're intense lately." The observation lands lightly, but it registers. Repetition changes that relationship. Hands reach for tools without instruction. Knees fold onto the mat the same way every time. The floor is cold. Skin reacts. Breath stutters, then steadies. The mind arrives late, irritated that it missed the opening. It offers commentary. The body ignores it. This is the quiet turning point. Discipline stops living in intention and settles into tissue. The nervous system memorizes the sequence. Time of day triggers movement. Location triggers posture. Absence triggers discomfort. The body begins to enforce the rule without consulting belief. Social friction increases here. People notice you don't check in with yourself anymore. You don't ask how the day feels. You don't crowdsource decisions. Plans collide with your fixed hours. Some stop inviting you. Others test you. "Just skip today," they say, smiling. The smile waits for compliance. The body doesn't hear them. It stands up anyway. This is where many feel uneasy. Automatic discipline looks inhuman from the outside. It lacks visible struggle. There is no heroic push, no collapse afterward. Just completion. People prefer effort they can recognize. They distrust calm execution. It exposes how much energy they waste convincing themselves to begin. Inside, the experience is equally strange. You don't feel proud. You don't feel driven. You feel neutral. The action happens, and afterward, the body settles into a familiar quiet. Pulse slowing. Heat fading from the muscles. A sense of order returns, physical rather than emotional. Miss the action, and the discomfort is immediate. Not guilt. Dislocation. Like wearing clothes twisted the wrong way. The day feels misaligned until the sequence is restored. This is the body asserting identity where the mind once negotiated. At this stage, motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't ask whether you want to train. That question feels misplaced, almost childish. The body already knows what happens at this hour. Your opinion arrives too late to matter. And when your own mind loses voting rights, you begin to sense a deeper shift approaching, one that will demand a final surrender. The social cost reveals what you've become. The change becomes visible before it feels complete. You arrive at the same place at the same hour, again. The door opens. Cold air meets skin. Shoes come off. Knees fold. The floor is unforgiving. Breath settles late. From the outside, it looks repetitive. From the inside, it feels inevitable. People start adjusting around you. Meetings are scheduled with caveats. Invitations include disclaimers. If you can make it, they say, already bracing. Some stop asking altogether. Others test the boundary with humor. Live a little, they laugh, watching your face for movement. There is none. This is where automatic discipline exposes its price. It costs social flexibility. It costs being easily available. It costs the comfort of being seen as agreeable. You feel it in small ways. Conversations pause when you stand up to leave. A friend rolls their eyes when you check the time. The room warms with mild irritation. Your body responds first. Shoulders stay relaxed. The breath remains even. You don't rush. You don't explain. The explanation would sound like an excuse, and excuses belong to negotiation. You thank them. You leave. The door closes behind you with a soft finality. This friction unsettles people because it reflects something back at them. Your predictability highlights their improvisation. Your absence exposes their dependence on mood. They feel judged without being accused. That discomfort often comes out as concern. You're too rigid, they say. You'll burn out. They are wrong about the reason. Rigidity lives in the mind. What you've built lives in the body. There is no tension in the movement. No forcing. Just sequence. Burnout comes from constant decision-making, from arguing with yourself daily. That argument no longer exists. Inside, something else changes. You stop feeling defensive. You don't need to justify the structure. The hour belongs to the action. Anyone who conflicts with it is simply outside the order. This isn't arrogance. It's clarity. The body recognizes what preserves it. Over time, the social field rearranges. Some drift away quietly. Others adapt. A few lean closer, curious. They notice you don't complain. You don't celebrate discipline either. You simply show up, leave, return. The repetition speaks without language. This is the final pressure point before identity locks in. Many retreat here. They soften the edges to regain comfort. They tell themselves balance matters. The body feels the compromise immediately. Something loosens. If you don't retreat, if you let the discomfort stand, a line is crossed. Discipline stops being something you practice. It becomes the standard others orient around, whether they like it or not. And once that standard exists, there is no quiet way back, the moment discipline stops asking permission. The shift is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. One morning, the routine completes without friction. No resistance. No inner commentary. The body finishes the sequence and settles. Pulse slowing. Heat leaving the muscles. You stand there briefly, aware that something didn't happen. There was no argument. That absence is the signal. Until now, discipline required enforcement. Even when automatic, there was a trace of compliance. A sense of I am doing this. Now the language changes. It feels closer to this is done. The action no longer belongs to effort. It belongs to order. The body confirms it first. Miss the routine, and the discomfort arrives fast. Not guilt. Not shame. A physical wrongness. Shoulders feel uneven. Breath stays shallow longer than it should. The day feels noisy, unaligned. The correction happens without thought. You create space. You return. Relief follows immediately. Others see the difference before you name it. They stop testing you. The jokes fade. The invitations either respect the structure or disappear. When conflict arises, it's brief. You don't negotiate. You don't explain. The explanation would suggest the rule is flexible. It isn't. This is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They think discipline has made you hard. It hasn't. It has made you simple. Fewer internal processes. Fewer decisions. Fewer leaks. The body conserves energy by obeying something older than preference. There is a cost. You feel it in quiet moments. You realize how much of your former life was built on permission-seeking. How often you waited to feel aligned before acting. That version of you feels distant now, almost foreign. Not weak. Just noisy. Automatic discipline doesn't make you intense. It makes you exact. When the action is complete, you stop. When rest is scheduled, you rest fully. There is no bleed over. No background anxiety. The system holds. At this stage, discipline can no longer be turned off without consequence. Skipping isn't a choice. It's a disruption. The body treats it like any other violation of order. Correct and move on. No drama. No story. This is the point of no return. Not because you've achieved something impressive, but because returning to negotiation would feel like regression. The mind could suggest it. The body would refuse. When discipline reaches this depth, it stops being a habit, a system, or a practice. It becomes a condition of existence. Something you live inside, rather than perform. And once that condition is set, the final question isn't how to maintain it. It's what kind of life can now be built on top of it, what remains when motivation is gone. Discipline is not what you do when you are strong. It is what remains when strength is no longer consulted. At the end of this road, nothing feels dramatic. There is no arrival. No reward. The body simply knows its order. Hours have shape. Actions have gravity. You move through the day without checking yourself against feeling. The nervous system stays quiet because it is no longer asked to decide who you are. This is why automatic discipline matters. Not for output. Not for achievement. But because it removes internal chaos. The mind stops leaking energy into debate. The body carries the rule. Life becomes lighter, not easier. Those who never reach this point believe discipline is exhausting. They imagine constant effort, constant pressure. They are wrong. What exhausts is negotiation. What drains is choice. What burns people out is living without a fixed internal law. Once discipline becomes automatic, you stop proving anything. You don't measure streaks. You don't announce commitment. You don't explain your structure. The explanation would imply fragility. What you've built doesn't need defense. This is where identity locks in. Not I try to be disciplined. Not I'm working on consistency. Just this, the action happens, or the day feels wrong. The order is internal now. Unseen. Unimpressed by opinion. Most people will never experience this. They will keep looking for motivation. They will keep resetting plans. They will keep asking how to start again. You don't need to start again. You need to stop asking. If this exposed you rather than inspired you, leave one sentence in the comments. Name the action that will happen at the same hour tomorrow. No explanation. No context. Just the act.